your mental health is improving, you should feel better emotionally. And if you are not feeling better emotionally, your mental health must not be improving. This is a very, very dangerous assumption. I know that it probably seems correct and logical on the surface, but there is a lot more happening between the variables of mental health and emotional state than you might be aware of. Far too often, I see people get discouraged, frustrated, and even discontinue doing things that help them because they don't feel the way they think they should feel based on how hard they're working and the things they are doing. For example, tell me if this sounds familiar to you. You've been in therapy for a while, you've maybe been taking psychiatric medication for a while, you're pretty compliant with both, you're generally working hard on those things, but on the inside, you pretty much just feel like the same person you've always been. You feel stuck, you feel stagnant, and you're not sure if any of those treatments are actually doing anything. Other people tell you that they can see a difference, and when you look at your life from sort of a bird's eye view, and you look at how your days are going and the things that you're doing, you can logically see, I do think things are a little bit different. But why don't I feel different on the inside? Or in some cases, you may actually feel worse. Your general level of emotional comfort and experience of pleasurable, enjoyable feelings might have actually gone down since you started treatment. Today, I want to explain to you three reasons why this can happen, what these things actually mean, and then explore some ideas for what you can do about them. Now, what all three of these things are going to have in common is this idea that your mental health, which includes but is not limited to your experience of pathological emotions. Pathological emotions, it's kind of subjective, but pathological emotions are emotional experiences that are somewhat detached from the actual events occurring in your life. So, for example, if I wake up tomorrow and I'm so depressed, I feel like the love of my life has just died. Like I feel that level of depression, and yet that has not happened. And in fact, my life, objectively, is basically the same tomorrow as it was today. But my inner emotional experience has shifted dramatically. That's a pathological emotion. If I experience debilitating anxiety about trying to come into work tomorrow, when my job is the same that it's been for however long, and I did it today and I was fine today, that is probably a pathological level of anxiety. Not every experience of depression and anxiety is pathological, though. Sometimes we experience those emotions and they're completely reasonable and completely contextual to what is going on in our lives. So we don't necessarily experience less non pathological depression or anxiety when our mental health is getting better. These are two different types, two different categories, if you will, of unpleasant emotional experiences that ultimately belong in different folders. And we don't want to combine them because if we combine them, we're going to end up with a really inaccurate view of our mental health and of our progress. And the really, really tricky, frustrating, counterintuitive part in therapy and in, I assume, psychiatric medication management as well, although I don't personally provide those services, is that sometimes as pathological feelings of depression and anxiety go down, sometimes the non-pathological feelings of depression and anxiety come up. And the result is a net flatline, if you will, kind of a break-even point, or sometimes we even feel worse. And by far, the biggest reason that I see people struggling with increased feelings of non-pathological depression and anxiety when their mental health is improving, and it's something that so few people seem to acknowledge and be prepared for, is that getting better is scary. Really, really, really scary. And there are many reasons for this. One of the biggest reasons is there is comfort and predictability and consistency in being at your rock bottom. It certainly does not feel good. Don't get me wrong. But if you've been experiencing relatively the same amount of depression and anxiety for 3 years, you know what tomorrow's going to bring. You know how you're going to feel when you wake up. There's no surprises in that. You're not necessarily worried about what tomorrow's going to be like because you have a very accurate sense of what it's going to be like. It's going to be what today was like. It's going to be the same. And it's not going to be great, but you know what to expect. You know what you're going to get because everything is stagnant, everything is flat, everything is, in a way, stable. When you start getting better and your mood starts to increase and your symptoms start to decrease, suddenly, for maybe the first time in a very long time, you now have something to lose. You now have something that you have to maintain, and that's something, and something that if you cannot maintain it, you're going to experience somewhat of a crash. And it's one thing to be at the bottom every day. It's another thing entirely to see the breaks in that. On a cloudy day, every now and then the sun peeks through and you get that little like sensation of sun on your skin. And it's like until that moment, you don't realize how bad you've missed the sun. And then 10 seconds later, it's behind a cloud again. And you're like, oh, now it's gone. I was really enjoying that. It's a little bit like that. You just start to have a little bit of hope, a little bit of optimism, and then you're like, oh my gosh, it's terrifying to feel these things because what if I can't keep them? What if I wake up tomorrow and they're gone? That crash sometimes hurts more than just being at the bottom chronically. The other scary thing that tends to happen when we're feeling better and when we're doing a little bit better is that expectations tend to increase. Sometimes those are mainly from other people. Sometimes those are mainly from you. Sometimes it's a little bit of both. But when you're stuck at rock bottom, and everyone knows you're stuck at rock bottom, and you haven't been able to get out of bed, go to work, or take care of yourself properly in years, then that's what people, for the most part, unless they're really ignorant about mental health, which sometimes they are, for the most part, then that's what people expect of you. People expect that you're going to be stuck because you've been stuck for a long time, and that's what people think they're probably going to get from you. When you start to feel a little bit better, when you have those cracks in the clouds, sometimes people notice that and they're like, oh, so now that you're doing better, have you thought about going back to school? Have you thought about getting a job? Have you thought about getting back on the dating scene? Have you thought about cleaning your house? Have you thought about having kids someday? It's like, and that might be a little bit of an exaggeration, or it might not be, depending on who's in your life. Sometimes it's like the second you aren't severely debilitatingly depressed, Aunt Gertrude is like, oh, so when you having kids? Or what, insert expectation here. And especially when you're not used to those expectations and you're already scared and you're already insecure about your ability to maintain this very new, very fragile, somewhat positive emotional state, and instantly people start trying to pile things on top of that really, really shaky framework that you're standing on. It's terrifying. And I'm kind of villainizing other people here. Sometimes it's you. Sometimes we do it to ourselves because we know, ooh, today's a better day. Time to tackle the 7,000 things on my to-do list that I haven't been able to get to for the last 3 years. It's a completely crushing, debilitating amount of pressure. And it can absolutely pull us right back down into that rock bottom place before we even get to enjoy being out of it. So, yeah, getting better is scary. I don't know why this is so hard for people to understand, but it really, really seems like it is. And so often I have encountered professionals and treatment providers who do not understand the uncertainty and the ambivalence that comes with making a commitment to yourself and to your mental health, working very hard on it, starting to see the results, and then going, oh, crap, I actually could do this. What does that actually mean for my life? Might be a strange comparison, but I think you'll get it. It reminds me a little bit of the first time that I held my newborn son. And I had like 3 seconds of just joy and awe and like, oh my gosh, we're here. This is amazing. And I'm not kidding. It was probably 3 seconds. And then instantly I'm like, what if I drop him? And it just, the whole situation just instantly felt so fragile to me. I had never experienced caring that much about like something that was so unstable. And that's what getting it, in a way, that's kind of what feeling better and doing better with your mental health feels like. It's like holding this very fragile, very small, not yet independently sustainable thing. And you're like, oh my gosh, like if I drop this, my life is just, oh, like that's the end. My life is over. This is so important and so vulnerable. I shouldn't be trusted with this. You're going to trust me with this? You don't know me. That's a bad idea. And it's just, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And I just want to validate that for anyone who has not gotten that validation before. That is the most common reason why I see people get stuck and backslide. And I so often see it mislabeled by professionals and by treatment providers. The backslide gets called willfulness or treatment resistance, or I don't even remember what else I've heard it called, but I don't like any of them. And I'm not saying that those things don't exist, but I think like 95% of the time that I've seen someone get one of those labels, it's because they have been so low for so long and they have so little faith in their own ability to maintain any kind of positive momentum and so little faith in their ability to survive crash. 'Cause that, again, that's the thing about rock bottom. It sucks, but there's no crash. Crash is usually the part that hurts the most. Crash hurts more than just being stuck at the bottom. And so many people, consciously, subconsciously, maybe a mix of both, are scared of or even avoid getting better because they're afraid of the crash. And that is a completely understandable fear. If that is a fear that you experience that has held you back from making or maintaining therapeutic progress, there are two things in general I want you to keep in mind that I think can be beneficial with this particular barrier. One is hierarchical exposure therapy. Now, that's usually something we apply in the context of obsessive compulsive disorder or phobias, but hierarchical exposure therapy can be used to deal with any fear. And that's going back to this idea of pathological and non-pathological emotion. Getting better is scary and it can actually produce non-pathological anxiety because now you have something to lose for the first time in a long time. But that feeling, that fear, same, more or less the same feeling I got holding my newborn son, it will decrease over time with practice and with exposure. The first time you feel hope or optimism or joy or excitement in months or years, it probably will terrify you, and that's not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable. But if you can just try not to panic, and I know telling a person with anxiety not to panic is like, don't be sad, depressed person. I know. But even if you're internally panicking and you feel the emotion of panic, try to recognize this actually makes sense that I feel this way given my history and given my situation. But I believe that if I can just sit with this, if I can just tolerate this and get used to it a little bit, it probably won't stay this scary. If I have a week where I feel this way, I'll get a little more used to it. It won't feel quite so fragile. It won't feel quite so vulnerable. I'll have a little bit more faith in my ability to maintain this. If I experience it for a month, I'm starting to build confidence at that point. So if you can just practice learning to sit with the discomfort that comes with the fear of getting better and all the things you potentially could lose if you're not able to maintain that, the longer you can just sit with it, experience it, coexist with it, the less scary that feeling is going to become. The other thing that can really help is to manage catastrophic thinking, because there does tend to be a lot of catastrophizing in this. Now, I know I just validated for you that the crash is worse than being stuck at rock bottom, and I'm not about to undo that. But I just want to make sure that you realize that if you have a period of improved mental health and improved functioning, and you then do have a period of time where you crash and you end up back in that same dark, familiar prison cell, well, it's not like you don't know how to live there. It's not like you don't have experience dealing with that. You're better at that than 99.9% of the population. It's still scary. Again, I'm not trying to blow that off. And I hope it doesn't happen to you. But if you end up at rock bottom again, well, you're skilled at that. And I don't mean like, oh, you're so bad at being bad or you're so good at being bad at life. I don't mean it that way. I mean, you know how to handle that. You've lived that way for how long? You can handle that if it happens again. And you don't necessarily have to live in constant fear of something that you have definitively proved to yourself that you can survive. It's not enjoyable, it's not fun, doesn't feel good, but you can handle it. You can survive it. So you don't need to live in constant fear of it, and you don't need to let that fear dictate your life and your treatment. The second reason that getting better can feel worse is what's called lifestyle creep. Now, you may have heard that term financially. It typically refers to the changes in our spending habits and our lifestyle when we start making more money, when our income goes up. And a lot of people talk about how, like, they get these promotions at work, and they get a better job, or their partner starts working, or their financial situation improves, but their stress about money never really goes down. And there can be many reasons for that, but one reason is if we have some not great spending habits or financial health, often the more we make, the more we spend. And so even if our income has doubled in the past 3 years, we're just as broke as we were before because we're still spending every penny that we make. Sometimes that's not avoidable. That's a whole tangent I'm not going to go on. But lifestyle creep is a real thing, and it perpetuates the same level of stress even if your circumstances change. Lifestyle creep also happens with mental health, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about in our first reason about expectations going up. If you, as you're feeling better and as you're functioning better, take on more and more challenges in life, your pathological anxiety starts to decrease. Your non pathological anxiety probably starts to increase because with more responsibility and more challenge and more on our plate comes more just actual life stress. And the net effect of this is kind of like playing a video game that has level scaling. And that's a reference that probably 2% of you understand. But there was this game I really used to like called Oblivion. It was one of the Elder Scrolls games, and it was such a cool game, but the entire world scaled to your character. So as your character got stronger and stronger, the enemies you would face would get stronger and stronger too, and the treasure you would find would get better and better, which in theory is a cool idea because it means that the game is never massively too hard or massively too easy. I did not personally like it because it made me feel like I was never making any progress because I had like this level, I don't know, 25 warrior or something with all this crazy gear, and like a random guard in town could still kill me. So I didn't feel any more powerful than I was at level 1. Well, our lives often scale to our mental health. And so when we're really in that rock bottom place, we're probably not doing a lot because we don't feel like we can. And as you start feeling better, yeah, maybe you're going back to school, maybe you're going back to work, maybe you're raising your expectations for your self-care or your management of your home. Maybe you're dating again. Maybe you do have kids finally like Aunt Gertrude wanted you to 10 years ago. So your life gets harder, your life gets busier, your life gets more stressful. So it kind of feels the same as it did before, but it's for different reasons. And so that's still really important for you to acknowledge to yourself. It's not necessarily that your emotions have changed dramatically, but the reasons that you experience those emotions have changed dramatically. And now your feelings are just an accurate reflection of the reality of standard adult life, which can still be really hard and disappointing. That was not the most optimistic pep talk I've ever given, but I hope it was at least validating. So, if lifestyle creep is something that you experience that makes it difficult for you to feel like you're getting any better, even though your mental health and your functioning are objectively improving, this is a tricky one, I know. But one thing I would think about doing is trying to pace yourself a little bit. I feel a little guilty saying that out loud because I am someone who's lost many years to mental health. And those lost years give my 40s, which I'm in now, tremendous sense of urgency. Like so I feel like I am making up for lost times. I still feel it's probably not even true anymore, although it certainly was true for a long time. I still feel like I'm playing catch up. Like I'm trying to make up for all the stuff I lost. And it's not really possible. Like your lost years are always going to be your lost years, and no amount of being frantic or chaotic or perfectionistic now is going to change that. There's just going to be grief that comes with that. And rather than trying to cope with that grief, I'm literally doing therapy on myself right now. This part's for me, just so you know. If it's also for you, cool, bonus for you, but this is for me. You just have to grieve it. You just have to grieve that loss. You cannot accommodate for it by doing a bunch of cool stuff later on. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do those things. But if you do them exclusively because you have a chronic sense of being behind in life, because for some certain period of time you very much were, that's not necessarily going to serve you. What you are at risk of when you take that mindset is you're actually at risk of burning yourself out and hitting another period where you lose time because you have expected so much of yourself, because you're trying to cram 10 years of lost life into 2 years of adulthood, and it's not possible. You can't do it. It's going to make you miserable to try. It's better to accept the lost time, grieve the lost time, let that hurt, and then create a sustainable path going forward that you can hopefully maintain for the rest of your life. Otherwise, your life is going to constantly be scaling out of control around you, and you might actually feel worse than when you started. And the third reason why getting better can feel worse is simply that change is hard and can make us sad. I was just talking to somebody about this last week, not even in therapy, just a casual conversation with somebody. And one thing that I did a lot of during my worst times, during my rock bottom, is I played a ton of video games. Sometimes by myself, often by myself, actually. Sometimes with friends. I had some good friends who were also very obsessive gamers. And although a lot of it was just lost downtime that's not particularly memorable or important to me, even in the midst of my least functional, least healthy period, I have cherished memories of that time. There were high points. There were laughing fits, there was bonding, there was brotherhood. It was very maladaptive, but it existed. And there's a part of me that looks back on that period of time in life, even though I know this is like not really true, as like, man, those were the good old days when I had nothing to do but sit around and play freaking Counter-Strike all day. And like, I would hate that life now. I would absolutely hate it. And yet I feel nostalgia for it. And as I was working on coming out of that period of time in my life, there were so many periods when I'd look back and be like, "Oh, but wait, but I kind of still want this. Like, I hate it, but I also kind of love it a little bit." And my example is gaming, but this is true with anything, right? People grieve abusive relationships because they're not horrible every second of every day. There's bright spots in them, and that's why people stay in them. People look back fondly on toxic jobs that they had because maybe they had the one coworker that they really liked, or they liked the work itself, even if they didn't like the work environment. Anything you have in your life probably has at least one part of it that's good. And so when you think about moving on, when you think about progressing, when you think about changing, you're also going to think about things that you're leaving behind. And no, I think this is universally true. No matter how bad things get, no matter how awful your situation is, there's probably at least one thing in your life right now that you don't want to lose. And change is scary because it leaves some things in the past. Often it's people. Like, we tend to surround ourselves with people who are in similar places to us in life, and that includes mental health. If you're if you experience severe depression and anxiety, you probably aren't friends with a ton of perfect mental health people because like you guys don't understand one another. You're not living the same lifestyle. You barely speak the same language. They don't get you, you don't get them. It's not a match. The people around you are probably people who struggle, maybe not exactly like you do, but in a somewhat comparable way. And if you get better and they don't, you might not have much in common with them anymore. You might leave them behind. Not that you're better than them or anything else, just that you grow apart because of these changes in your life. Or hobbies. Like, I know I'm a gaming addict. I know it's not a healthy thing for me to have in my life. I know that it would take the place of more important things. Still kind of miss it. Not going to do it, but I miss it. There's a part of me that will always cherish some of those memories, and there's a part of me that is really, really sad that that's over. Would never go back in a million years. Life now is so much better. I cannot even comprehend, but I still miss it. And I don't think I'm alone in that. That's how memories work. That's how nostalgia works. That's why people resist change. One of the reasons, anyway. It's hard to grieve things. It's hard to move on from things. And just sticking with what we know, there's comfort in that. We don't want to lose those things. We don't want to leave those people behind. We're afraid that if we really change in the ways we need to get our lives on track, we're going to leave a lot behind. It's a scary, scary thing. I don't really have a solution to that one, as in a way. I guess I don't have solutions to any of these in a way that's going to make it not hurt because that's reality. That's the reality of this work. It's hard. It's really, really hard and it's really, really scary. If this third one is one that really hits home for you, explore it with yourself, ideally with a therapist, right? Or like safe people, validate it. It's normal to have ambivalence and uncertainty about moving on from a phase of life, even if that phase is awful. It's your normal. It is your routine, and leaving it behind is scary, it is sad, it is uncomfortable. Even if you know what comes next is almost certainly gonna be better. It's gotta be, right? Like, it can't be much worse. Um, and grieve it. Treat it like grief. I grieve the loss of friends. They're not dead, I don't think. Some of them I'm not in contact with anymore. I don't think any of them have died. Probably still out there. I could probably call them if I wanted to, but I think we'd have much common ground anymore. I grieve the loss of hobbies that no longer have a place in my life. I grieve memories that I'm never going to get to experience again, even though they were part of pathological and unhealthy lifestyles and cycles, and I know they were terrible for me. Still kind of miss them. Still do. And that's okay. In fact, it's essential to recognize that, to be open about it, and to take it seriously within. Because other people won't always get it, right? Like they might not, but you still can. I hope that you do. I hope you understand that for yourself and you can validate that for yourself. More than anything, I hope that this content today has helped you understand yourself better and maybe help you understand some of the reasons you get stuck in the early phases of progress and of getting better. And maybe, boy, would this make me happy if it was true. Maybe I've even given you some of the tools to start to push through those barriers and reach your next level of recovery. Let me know if it's landing for you, and I will see you next time. Take care.